You know, I've lived a quiet life since I retired. After 27 years in the Marine Corps, I'd had my fill of noise, chaos, and people barking orders they didn't understand. All I ever wanted after that was a peaceful place to work with my hands, drink my coffee on the porch, and not be bothered. That's why Linda and I moved into Magnolia Ridge, a gated neighborhood in Tampa. Real quiet, real clean. Almost too clean, if you know what I mean. HOA types loved it. At first, it felt like a good choice. Nice neighbors, wide sidewalks, manicured lawns. But I learned quickly, the price of that peace was dealing with an HOA run by people who had way too much time on their hands. You miss a trash day? Citation. Your flagpole is 2 inches taller than regulation? Fine in the mail. I kept my head down, paid what I had to, and tried not to stir the pot. That is, until my daughter Natalie came to stay. She's my pride and joy, 34 years old, a tactical commander with the FBI. She's the type of woman who doesn't take any mess, but you'd never know it to look at her. Dresses simple, jogs in the mornings, keeps to herself. She'd just finished a 6-month assignment and decided to stay with us for a couple weeks while I recovered from a knee surgery. I remember the first morning she went for a jog. It was 6:45 a.m., cool air, dew still fresh on the grass. I was sipping coffee on the porch when I saw that little security golf cart creeping along behind her. The guy behind the wheel? Rick Coleman. Now Rick, he's not a real cop. Never was. He's what you get when you give a mall cop a clipboard and a flashlight and call it authority. Mid-40s, wears knockoff tactical gear, always armed, and always barking about neighborhood security. Self-appointed chief of security for the HOA. A joke if you ask me, but not one you can laugh at unless you want trouble. I watched him slowly tail her down the block like she was a criminal. Natalie didn't even glance back. Kept her pace, finished her loop, and came home. "Dad," she said, breathing lightly as she wiped her forehead, "what's with the wannabe SWAT guy back there?" I told her, "That's Rick. Ignore him. He's just loud and lonely." She smirked. "You sure he's not dangerous?" I gave her the same answer I'd given myself 100 times. As long as you don't give him a reason, he won't do anything. I wish I'd known how wrong I was. A few days passed. Natalie kept jogging in the mornings, sometimes walking in the evenings. Rick kept showing up. Sometimes he'd follow her from a distance. Sometimes he'd loop around like he was just patrolling. But it didn't feel right. I brought it up to the HOA once, just asked politely if he could tone it down. Their reply? "We value Mr. Coleman's contributions to the community." Translation: "Shut up and be grateful he hasn't cited you yet." Then one evening, things took a turn. It was just after sunset. Natalie had gone for a walk after dinner. She liked to clear her head. Long day of remote meetings, I suppose. She took the trail that curved behind the tennis courts, near the small wooded section that backed up to the retention pond. We'd walked it dozens of times. It was public common space. No rules against using it. But that night, Rick decided she didn't belong there. I was in the garage working on a custom bench when I got the call. Not a text. A call. From Natalie. "Dad," she said, her voice calm but cold. "I need you to come to the trailhead behind the pond. And bring your phone. Record this." I hobbled out as fast as my bad knee would allow. When I got there, the sun was almost gone. Just that purplish blue hanging in the sky. And there, under one of the HOA security lamps, stood Rick. And he had his pistol drawn. Not holstered. Not low-ready. Pointed. My daughter. She had her hands raised, calm, composed, not scared. Just disappointed. "You're trespassing," Rick barked. "You ignored repeated warnings." Natalie replied slowly, "I'm a resident's family member. I'm walking on common grounds. And you just committed a felony." He sneered, shaking slightly. "I am the security authority here." That's when she moved. Now, I've seen some fast disarms in my day, but what Natalie did, it was fluid. 1 second, Rick was pointing a gun at her chest. The next, she'd stepped into his frame, twisted his wrist, disarmed him, and had him face down on the ground in under 4 seconds. She held the weapon safe, turned toward me, and said, "Start recording." I didn't even ask. I just hit record on my phone. Rick started barking again. She assaulted me. That was unprovoked. Natalie ignored him, calmly called the local police, gave her location, and reported an armed threat with a firearm. She didn't flash her badge. Didn't say who she was. Just followed protocol. When the cops arrived, things got complicated. Rick was already spinning his story, claimed Natalie charged at him, and that he drew in self-defense. The officers were polite but distant. One of them knew Rick by name, called him Ranger Rick, if you can believe it. I tried to show them the video. They shrugged. "We'll review it if charges are filed." They asked Natalie if she wanted to press charges. She said not yet. They gave Rick back his weapon. I'll say that again. They gave him back his weapon. And then they left. That night, over dinner, Natalie said nothing. Just pushed her food around. She looked out the window once, saw Rick's golf cart crawl past with its cheap red-blue lights flashing. Then she looked at me and said, "He thinks he got away with it." I nodded. She smiled cold, precise. "Good." I raised an eyebrow. "Good." She stood up from the table, stretched her neck, and replied, "He doesn't know who I am yet. But he will." And that's when I realized, Rick had just picked a fight with the wrong woman. My daughter wasn't just some jogger in gym shorts. She was trained by the feds, led hostage rescues, and had more tactical hours logged than any officer in this county. And Rick? He was playing soldier in a golf cart. The storm was coming, and he wouldn't even see it until it hit. The morning after that incident, I expected the HOA to show up at my door with an apology, or at least a letter of concern. But instead, I got something entirely different. An envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a notice of violation. Violation: unauthorized use of community trails after dusk. Fine, $250. Payable immediately. And stapled behind it? A formal warning addressed to Natalie. Suspicious behavior observed by community security. Continued noncompliance may result in police involvement or removal from premises. My hands were shaking. Not from fear. From fury. I'd swallowed a lot from this HOA. Passive-aggressive letters, rules about how many flower pots were allowed on my porch, even a complaint about my American flag being too prominently displayed. But this? This was a threat. To my daughter. After she was nearly shot. I showed her the letter that morning. She scanned it once and nodded. "So they're choosing sides." "Looks that way," I muttered. Natalie smiled again. That tight-lipped, strategic smile I'd seen once before, when she was planning an op against a cartel informant in El Paso. "They think I'm just your daughter. They don't know what I really do." "You planning to tell them?" I asked. "Not yet. Let them dig their own hole first." Over the next week, the harassment turned systematic. Rick started parking his golf cart across the street from our driveway every night, engine humming, lights off, just watching. I saw him take pictures of Natalie when she left the house in her hoodie and yoga pant. We'd take walks and hear the radio static crackle from his hip. He'd whisper things like, "Copy that, suspicious activity on Birch Lane," while glaring directly at her. One night, I caught him slowly rolling past our house at 2:13 a.m. I saw the flick of a flashlight beam pass over my living room window like he was casing the place. That's when Natalie said, "We're putting up cameras." And she did. 4 ultra-wide-angle security cams with night vision, motion detection, and direct cloud backup. She mounted one to face the driveway, one over the door, one in the backyard, and one hidden in a fake birdhouse pointed at the street. "You planning a stakeout?" I joked. "Evidence collection," she said flatly. "You don't fight people like Rick with fists. You bury them in documentation." And oh boy, did the documentation start rolling in. In just 4 days we caught Rick walking onto our porch with a flashlight, peeking through our windows, taking pictures of our license plates, lifting our mailbox lid and reading outgoing envelope, whispering into his fake walkie-talkie while staring directly into our Ring camera. It wasn't just creepy. It was criminal. But when Natalie took the footage to the local sheriff's office, they gave her the runaround. Sorry, ma'am. That trail is owned by the HOA. And Rick is authorized as their enforcer. Enforcer? She repeated, raising an eyebrow. Since when can neighborhood watch volunteers carry weapons and conduct surveillance? The deputy shrugged. He's not technically law enforcement. But we can't intervene unless there's bodily harm. Natalie leaned in. He drew a gun on me. Then why didn't you file charges? She smiled politely. Because I was building a case. And now I am. That night, she sat at my kitchen table with a laptop, headphones in, documents spread around her like a war map. I'm starting the formal chain, she said. I blinked. What chain? Internal affairs. State licensing board. Federal oversight committees. I'm not going to file this as a civilian. I felt a pulse of energy hit the air. You're not? I asked slowly. She turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was her badge ID. Special Agent Natalie Sullivan. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Tactical Operations Command. Clearance level. Restricted. You're going official? I said, stunned. She nodded. Not full scale yet. But we'll get there. And she did. Over the next few days, Natalie submitted 3 formal complaints. To the Florida Division of Licensing, Rick was carrying a weapon on community patrols without a guard license. To the State Board of Homeowner Associations, alleging unlawful surveillance, harassment, and misuse of HOA powers. To the FBI's Community Threat Division, on grounds that a self-appointed security officer brandished a weapon on a federal officer, off-duty or not, that's a felony if proven. And the best part? Rick had no idea. He still strutted around the neighborhood like a Walmart Rambo. Still barked at teenagers for skateboarding. Still waved his pistol around like it was a sheriff's badge. But the clock was ticking. And then the HOA fired their next shot. An emergency security review notice showed up at our house. It said the HOA had voted to conduct a full home evaluation to ensure compliance with community security regulations. They scheduled it without consent, claimed they had authority to inspect properties due to recent safety incidents. Natalie narrowed her eyes when she read it. They want to enter the house? She asked. Looks like it, I muttered. She pulled up the HOA bylaws, combed through them line by line. There's nothing in here that lets them do that. This is a bluff. She started making calls. One of them was to a friend in federal real estate compliance. Another was to the regional field office in Miami. She wasn't going public yet, but she was warming the engines. Then she did something I didn't expect. She started digging into the HOA's financial report. Turns out, every HOA board has to file annual expenditures. Most residents never bother to look. But Natalie did. And what she found? Gold. $14,600 listed under security upgrades. Description: surveillance equipment, tactical uniforms, vehicle outfitting. That was HOA money. Resident dues. Used to buy Rick his fake military outfit, his flashing lights, his police scanner. Worse, there was no licensed vendor listed. The check had been written directly to Rick's name. She looked up at me and said, "They've just crossed the line from annoying to criminal fraud." I blinked. "You're saying they paid him directly?" "Yep." "To act like a cop?" "Yep." "With our money?" Bingo. That night, I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched Rick's cart roll by again. But this time, I didn't feel that gnawing frustration. I didn't feel helpless. I just felt patient. Because I knew what Natalie knew. The walls were closing in. And all Rick could do was sit there in his plastic throne, completely unaware that the woman he pointed a gun at was about to flip his whole empire upside down. She looked out the window one more time and said quietly, "Let's see how brave he is when the feds show up on his porch." When the knock came at Rick's door, it wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was precise. 3 tap. Not a cop knock. Not a neighbor knock. It was the knock of someone who already knew what was inside. It happened 2 weeks after Natalie filed the last report. She'd been calm, calculating, letting things unfold while the paper trail did the heavy lifting. By that point, we had hard evidence, state violations, and even 2 other residents who came forward with complaints of Rick harassing their teenage sons near the community pool. Natalie never raised her voice, never made a scene, just documented everything, filed everything, escalated the right way. That's how she got results. And now those results were standing on Rick's porch, in the form of 2 federal agents from the Bureau's Office of Professional Responsibility, accompanied by a deputy U.S. Marshal and a man in a gray suit who didn't say much at all. I watched it from a distance, just down the street. Natalie sat beside me on the porch swing, coffee in hand, eyes locked on Rick's house. "Think he knows who they are?" I asked. She didn't even blink. "He will." The door opened. Rick stepped out, still in his ridiculous tactical vest and utility belt. The marshal stepped forward, showed him a badge. That's when Rick flinched. See, the marshal didn't ask. He told him, "We're executing a warrant for surveillance equipment, unlicensed firearms, and HOA financial documents." Rick stammered something about calling the HOA president. The agent just replied, "You can do that after we're done. You've got 5 minutes to hand over your weapons and your keys. We suggest you cooperate." And then the floodgates opened. Within 15 minutes, they had confiscated his unregistered sidearm, 2 tactical radios on unauthorized frequencies, a personal laptop full of footage from hidden cameras, several folders marked incident logs, handwritten notes tracking neighbors by time, date, and movement, and a box labeled Security Archive that included USB drives with over 400 hours of resident footage. All of it was logged, bagged, labeled, and gone. The best part? Natalie had given them probable cause by citing exactly where to look. Turns out Rick hadn't just been watching us. He had cameras placed illegally throughout the neighborhood, some tucked into light poles, others disguised as lawn decor. He'd been spying on his neighbors, and now every single second of it was federal evidence. By the time they were done, Rick was sitting on the curb, pale as milk, hands shaking. Natalie stood up and started walking down the sidewalk toward him. "Nat," I called. "You sure you want to do this?" She turned, smiled. "Oh, I'm just going for a jog." She passed him slowly, in full view of the agents, then stopped and looked down at him. "You remember me, Rick?" she said calmly. He looked up, confused, still dazed. "What?" "You pulled a gun on me 3 weeks ago." His face twitched. She stepped closer, voice still even. "You didn't know who I was. Now you do." He blinked. You set me up. You're FBI." She leaned in just a little. "I didn't set you up. You set yourself up. I just gave you the rope." And then she jogged away. Just like that. No yelling. No threats. Just quiet justice. But we weren't done. Not even close. The next week, the HOA held an emergency board meeting. Closed doors. Whispered calls. Half the board was panicking. They'd all signed off on the security enhancements, including the direct checks to Rick. Every board member who tried to distance themselves got hit with state-level subpoenas. Natalie had also filed a formal complaint with the Florida Department of Financial Services. Their investigators began auditing HOA spending. Every dollar, every vendor. Turns out, Rick wasn't the only one dipping into the funds. The HOA president, a smug woman named Beverly Langston who'd once fined me $50 for hanging wind chimes, was also drawing a consulting fee from the HOA budget. She was billing $1,200 a month to manage compliance concerns. Translation: she paid herself to run a dictatorship. By month's end, the board had resigned. Every single member. And Natalie? She didn't even celebrate. She just packed her things, nodded at me, and said, I've got to get back to DC. My team needs me. Just like that? I asked. She nodded. Justice served. And she was right. The HOA was dismantled from the inside. A temporary management company was brought in. Rick? He wasn't just stripped of his so-called security status. He was now facing 3 felony charges: impersonating a law enforcement officer, unlawful surveillance, aggravated assault with a firearm. He took a plea deal. No jail time, but 5 years probation, mandatory psychiatric evaluation, and a lifetime ban from any security or neighborhood enforcement roles. He also had to sell his house. That's right. Rick left Magnolia Ridge in disgrace. But it didn't end there. The HOA tried to recover. New board, new rules. But Natalie had one last move. She bought a small property, just half an acre, located right behind the community trail. Privately owned. Previously undeveloped. And then? She put up a 20-foot concrete wall, with a motion-triggered alarm, and a sign that read, Private Federal Training Zone. Entry strictly prohibited. Of course, it wasn't actually a training zone, but the residents didn't know that. It was her way of leaving a reminder, a quiet monument to what happens when power goes unchecked. She called me a week later. You think it's too much? I laughed. No, baby. It's perfect. The HOA once tried to control everyone through fear, fake authority, and intimidation. But in the end, they learned what real power looks like. And real power doesn't bark at joggers. It doesn't wear fake badges or flashlights in the dark. Real power walks calmly, files paperwork, gathers evidence, and strikes when it's too late to run. The sun rose over Magnolia Ridge that fall with a different kind of light. No more HOA patrols. No Rick lurking in his tactical clown suit. No veiled threats disguised as notices. The street, once silent under the weight of fear and fake authority, had started to come alive again. Kids rode their bikes freely, laughing without looking over their shoulders. People started decorating their porches again. Flags, lights, even the once-banned wind chimes returned in full force. And me? I finally slept through the night. After Rick pled out and was forced to sell his house, the air shifted. Neighbors who once kept to themselves now stopped by to talk. One woman, Sarah, from 2 doors down, brought over a fresh pie just to say thank you. We all knew something was wrong, she said. But none of us had the guts to take them on. What your daughter did. It gave us all permission to stop being afraid. I just nodded. She's always been the brave one. Natalie returned to DC, back to the life she rarely talked about in detail. Tactical missions, encrypted files, clearances none of us could comprehend. But her impact in that little gated Florida community would outlast any of her field reports. Because Natalie didn't just stop a corrupt HOA. She dismantled an entire culture of intimidation, one rule, one form, one silent video file at a time. A month later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small black box. I opened it to find a custom-made challenge coin. On one side, the FBI seal. On the other, an image of a quiet suburban street with the words engraved. Courage doesn't shout. It watches. And then acts. I knew who it was from. And I knew exactly where to put it. Right on the mantel, next to the fake HOA violation that Natalie had framed, the one that said she was being suspicious. Oh, the irony. But just when we thought the storm had passed, a final twist reminded us that not all battles stay buried. It happened when the new HOA board held their first open forum. Residents were allowed to voice concerns directly. It was civil, calm, until one man stood up from the back and started shouting. It was Rick. He hadn't moved far, just rented an apartment 2 towns over. He barged into the meeting and started ranting about how he'd been targeted, how the community had betrayed a veteran, how he had served and sacrificed only to be disrespected by a deep state operative. Security escorted him out before it got worse. But the damage was done. The new board realized they still had some cleanup to do. So they passed what would later be called the Magnolia Reforms, a set of new bylaws written with transparency, limits on board power, and strict penalties for any surveillance or enforcement activity not approved through public vote. But the best clause? Section 8.7. All board-appointed security must be licensed, uniformed, and unarmed. Period. And just like that, Rick's legacy was written in ink, as everything not to be. A year passed. The house next to mine, Rick's old place, was eventually bought by a young couple with a baby on the way. They put in a small swing set in the backyard and started hosting weekend barbecues. The place, once a symbol of paranoia and power trips, became the heart of the neighborhood again. And I finally took down the "No Trespassing" sign from my own front yard. Because I didn't need it anymore. Justice had been served. And it wasn't served with guns or threats. It was served with facts, with calm, with evidence. It was served by a woman who knew exactly how far authority could go, and what happens when it goes too far. Natalie came to visit once that summer, months after the dust had settled. We sat on the back porch again, looking out at the same trail where it had all started. "You ever think about moving?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not anymore. This place? It's mine now." She smiled. And then she told me something I'll never forget. When I walked into that HOA file room, when I saw what Rick had been doing, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm, because I knew the rules. I knew exactly what to do. I nodded. "That's what scared them the most, you know." "What?" "That you didn't yell. You didn't fight back like they expected. You let the truth do the talking." She finished her coffee. Truth is tactical. She left the next morning. But before she did, she gave me one last thing, a binder labeled simply, "Future Threat Protocol." Inside, a full guide on what to do if anyone, board member, neighbor, or self-proclaimed security, ever tried anything like that again. I keep it under the sink, next to the fire extinguisher. Not because I expect trouble, but because I'll never be unprepared again. Neither will this neighborhood. And as for Rick, last I heard, he was trying to start a neighborhood watch consulting business online. Nobody's hiring him. Because when people Google his name, the first thing that pops up is the court case. The second is a Reddit thread titled, "Florida HOA tried to threaten the wrong FBI agent, and got destroyed." That post has over 80,000 upvote. Justice travels far these days. So let this be a lesson. To every bully behind a clipboard, every rent-a-cop with a god complex, and every HOA board that forgets they work for the people, not above them. You never know who you're messing with, especially when they're jogging in a hoodie, carrying a badge you'll never see coming.